Most lawyers worry about AI making things up, and that's understandable. If ChatGPT invents a case, cites a non-existent authority, or creates facts that aren't there, that's obviously a problem. But after talking with lawyers and reviewing a lot of AI-generated legal work, I've become convinced that hallucinations are not the biggest risk. The bigger risk is something much quieter, something much harder to spot. It's called drift. And the reason drift is dangerous is simple. The output still sounds professional, it still sounds intelligent, it still sounds like something a lawyer might write, but the meaning has changed. And that's where problems begin. When most people hear the word drift, they think of major changes. That's not what I'm talking about. Drift is subtle. It's when AI gradually changes the scope of a clause, the tone of an email, the level of certainty, the strength of an obligation, or even the commercial position being communicated, without anyone explicitly asking it to. The output isn't wrong, it's just no longer saying exactly what the original text was intended to say. And because the language often becomes cleaner and more polished, people assume it's better. That's the trap. The more professional the output sounds, the less likely people are to question it. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine a lawyer has drafted this clause. The supplier shall use reasonable efforts to deliver the services by the target completion date. The lawyer then asks AI, improve the clause. The AI produces, the supplier shall ensure delivery of the services by the target completion date. Now look at that for a moment. The second version sounds stronger, it sounds cleaner, it sounds more decisive. Many people would read it and think, great, the AI improved the drafting. But did it? Not really. The original clause created an obligation to use reasonable efforts. The revised clause creates what may be interpreted as a much stronger obligation to achieve a result. That's not a stylistic change. That's a legal and commercial change. The AI didn't hallucinate. It didn't invent anything. It didn't make an obvious mistake. It drifted. And if nobody notices, that change moves forward into the next draft, then into negotiations, then potentially into the final agreement. One reason lawyers misdrift is because they're conditioned to look for errors. They're looking for things that are clearly wrong. Incorrect facts, incorrect dates, missing information, broken logic. Drift doesn't usually appear like that. Instead, it appears as improvement. The sentence becomes smoother. The wording becomes more concise. The structure becomes more elegant. Everything feels better. Except the meaning may have shifted. And because lawyers are often working under pressure, it's easy to review the language rather than review the intent. The AI output passes the looks good test. But legal work requires something more demanding. It has to pass the means the same thing test. When lawyers use AI, I repeatedly see 4 common forms of drift. 1. Scope drift. The AI broadens or narrows what is being discussed. For example, a clause covering a specific obligation becomes a clause covering multiple obligations. Nothing looks wrong, the scope simply changes. 2. Certainty drift. This is very common in client communications. A sentence such as, "We believe there is a reasonable argument," becomes, "there is a strong argument." The level of certainty has changed. The legal analysis may not have. 3. Tone drift. This often happens in negotiations. A carefully balanced email becomes more aggressive or more accommodating. The facts stay the same, the negotiating position changes. 4. Obligation drift. This is probably the most dangerous. Words like reasonable efforts, commercially reasonable efforts, shall consider, may request, suddenly become stronger or weaker. Again, the AI thinks it's improving the text, but it's actually changing the obligation. A lot of people think the answer is simply better prompting, and better prompting absolutely helps. For example, instead of saying improve this clause, you might say improve the clarity and readability of this clause without changing its legal meaning. Commercial position, allocation of risk, scope, obligations, or level of certainty. That's a much better prompt. But even then, drift can still occur, which is why I don't think the solution is prompt engineering alone. The solution is workflow design. The most effective AI users I've seen do not rely on a single interaction. They use a staged workflow. Human, AI, human. First, the lawyer defines the objective. Then AI produces a draft. Then the lawyer reviews not just the wording, but the meaning. The review question becomes, what changed? Not, does this sound good? Those are very different questions. The first question identifies drift. The second often misses it. So if you're worried about hallucinations, that's reasonable, but don't stop there. Because the biggest risk in legal AI isn't always when the output is obviously wrong. It's often when the output looks completely right. Professional, polished, convincing, and quietly different from what you intended. That's drift. And in my experience, it's one of the most important skills lawyers need to develop when using AI in legal work. If you've seen examples of drift in your own drafting, contract review, or client communications, I'd be interested to hear about them in the comments. Because the more examples we share, the easier it becomes to spot.